Thank you all very much for coming today. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Ed. Getting a little feedback here, Bob. There we go. Can you still hear me in the back? One thing that Ed left off of his preamble here was the fact that he is going to be leaving us by the end of this year. He's moving to California, if California is still there after the fires. I hope your family is all safe out there. And I know that the museum wouldn't be what it is today without his efforts. In fact, he has a little apartment upstairs where he lives because he spent so much time here and has done so much to make the museum what it is and what it's going to transition into. And I want to personally applaud Ed for all of his efforts.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
We'll let the cat out of the bag on that one. Yeah. Well, I want to thank all of you for being here today. As we approach Veterans Day, and as Ed was talking about all of the amazing events that are coming up to salute veterans, and I see from your hats that most, if not all of you, are veterans who are with us today. And there are plenty of opportunities for you and your fellow veterans to be saluted and honored in the next few weeks. And I hope you'll take advantage of that, because our country has finally realized that the men and women who served in various wars, especially Vietnam, myself being a Vietnam veteran, did not get the welcome home that we should have, and they are doing their best to make up for that lack of recognition. So I hope that you will go. I remember at Mountain View High School last year, as Ed said, there were 2,000 students there. After the program in the auditorium, they had us veterans walk through the hallways, and so we left the auditorium, and the first floor hallway was lined with students applauding us. By the time we got to the end of the hallway, I mean, the goosebumps were just, growing like mushrooms. And they said, but wait, there's more. And they sent us up to the second floor, where there was another 1,000 students lining the hallways, applauding us and shaking our hands and giving us high fives. It's the most moving tribute I've ever been a part of as a veteran, and I hope that you will see fit to take part in that as well. Well, today we're going to talk about the World War II in the Riviera. And if you can see the map here, the Riviera is this area of southern France on the Mediterranean, which became the Allies' other D-Day. Of all the thousands of battles that took place across the globe during World War II, arguably the one that's most remembered 75 years ago is what became known as D-Day, Operation Overlord, the Normandy invasion on June 6, 1944. On that fateful day, the Americans, British, Canadian, and French commenced the largest and most important air and sea operation of the war, and probably of all time, because I don't think we'll ever again see another military operation this massive. Operation Overlord involved some 7,000 ships and landing craft, 11,590 aircraft of all types, bombers, fighters, and transport planes, 156,000 ground troops coming in by sea, and another nearly 23,000 troops arriving by parachute or glider. It was a difficult battle with casualties high. Almost everything that could go wrong did go wrong at many of the 5 landing beaches. The Allies, the Americans, British, and Canadians had about 6,145 men killed and about the same number wounded, missing, or captured on June 6 alone. The Germans had equally high numbers. Hitler had proclaimed that his Atlantic Wall was impregnable, but thanks to a sound strategic plan, superb tactical execution, and excellent leadership, the Allies punched through the wall in the span of a morning. Overlord was a brilliant success. What has been lost over the past 75 years is the fact that there was another invasion of France, this one coming 2 months and 9 days after the one in Normandy. It was codenamed Operation Dragoon, and it took place in the Riviera, or Côte d'Azur, Provence region of southern France. Here's a map showing the invasion area. The resort towns of Nice, Cannes, Saint-Maxime, and Saint-Tropez were right in the crosshairs of the invading forces. Some people have called Dragoon the forgotten D-Day, and yet it was every bit as important and nearly as large as the Normandy invasion. Before we move on, I should explain, most of you already know this, that the term D-Day is simply military talk for the day that an operation begins, any operation, because the starting date might change as it did with the Normandy invasion. In that sense, there were hundreds of D-Days, but the term has become associated with only one, Operation Overlord at Normandy. And by the way, the time that an operation begins is known as H-hour. Today we know the Riviera as a place of elegant, expensive seafront hotels, a place to gamble your wealth away, a rather well-known film festival, and a playground for the rich and famous. But in August 1944, the playground became a battleground. So how did war come to the beautiful Riviera? To understand the strategy behind Dragoon, we have to go back 2 years earlier, when the invasion of France was being planned at Chafe headquarters in London. After successfully commanding 3 important amphibious operations in the Mediterranean, Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa, Husky, the invasion of Sicily, and Avalanche, the invasion of mainland Italy, General Dwight D. Eisenhower was selected to command the biggest invasion of all, Overlord. Using all the skills he learned about conducting large multinational amphibious operations and holding a shaky allied coalition force together to achieve a common goal, Ike set about the complex task. Nothing less than the fate of civilization hung in the balance. Now we have to go back in time to learn why it was important for the Allies to invade France in the first place. Nazi Germany's dictator, Adolf Hitler, had come to power in 1933. He had a long-standing hatred of the West for defeating Germany in World War I. He also had an animus against the Versailles Treaty that had ended the war and forced Germany to pay ruinous reparations for its role in starting the Great War. And he had a deep-seated fear of communism and its birthplace, the Soviet Union. Through his hatred of the Jews and this other element that he had against communism, you have the seeds planted for World War II. After building up his armed forces in preparation for war, in March 1938, Hitler annexed his homeland of Austria. In September of that year, Hitler demanded that Czechoslovakia turn over to Germany the German-speaking border areas known as the Sudetenland that you see marked by the arrows on this map. Britain and France opposed such a move, but ultimately decided to give Hitler his way, an act known as appeasement, rather than risk all-out war. Here, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain holds up a document that Hitler signed, pledging that he would have no more territorial ambitions. And Chamberlain claimed that it represented peace in our time. Well, not quite. In September of 1939, Hitler's armies invaded Poland, an act of aggression that finally pushed Britain and France to act. Declaring war on Germany on September 3rd, both Britain and France prepared to fight, not to engage the Germans in Poland, but to protect France and Belgium from German aggression. Meanwhile, Hitler cast his eyes at some other places. In April 1940, he sent his armies into Norway, which quickly surrendered. Emboldened by his success, the next month his armies plunged into Denmark, Holland, Luxembourg, Belgium, and France. The invasion was swift, lightning swift, and so the world learned a new German word, blitzkrieg, lightning war. The British Expeditionary Force that had been sent to France to forestall just such a scenario was forced to retreat back to Dunkirk in May and June 1940. The Germans swiftly overran the northern half of France and occupied Paris. Here's Hitler and his entourage playing tourists in Paris. But not all of France was occupied by the Germans. 40% was established by Germany as a free zone on this map, also called Vichy France because its capital was at Vichy. But the zone was anything but free. The Germans coerced 84-year-old Marshal Philippe Pétain, France's great national hero and the hero of Verdun from World War I, into forming a puppet government whose capital was at Vichy, thinking that if he cooperated with the Germans, including giving in to Germany's demands that French Jews be rounded up and shipped off to concentration camps, he could repair the ruin caused by the invasion and obtain the release of numerous prisoners of war. Pétain asked for an armistice. After it was concluded, the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate, meeting in Vichy, conferred upon Pétain almost absolute powers as chief of state. With the German army occupying 2/3 of the country in the southern part of France, left free by the armistice, Pétain set up a paternalistic regime. He was, however, opposed to the policy of that close Franco-German collaboration that was advocated by his vice premier Pierre Laval, whom he dismissed in December of 1940. He replaced Laval with Admiral François Darlan, the admiral of the fleet and chief of staff of the French Navy, the fourth largest in the world. Meanwhile, Eisenhower and his staff were making plans for the invasion of North Africa. North Africa was a logical starting point for direct American ground involvement in the war against Nazi Germany. The untried American forces were not yet strong enough to invade France or the continent, and attacking North Africa would give the troops much-needed combat experience. A successful landing would also force Erwin Rommel, commander of the German Africa Corps, to fight a desert war on two fronts. However, the reception the Allies soldiers would receive from the Vichy troops was open to question. If Germany's Africa Corps could be driven from North Africa, Allied bases in Tunisia would threaten the access from the air and provide a staging area for potential operations in southern Europe. Key to making this invasion work was persuading the French, who had a strong naval presence in the eastern Mediterranean and about 120,000 troops in North Africa, to not interfere with the landings and perhaps even come over to the Allied side. A plan was hatched to persuade the French in North Africa to ally themselves with the Americans and British. Eisenhower sent his deputy, Mark Clark, and diplomat Robert Murphy on a secret and dangerous mission to meet with Vichy French officials in North Africa and get the French to join the Allied side. A British submarine took Clark and a few other officers from Gibraltar to a spot off the Algerian coast. Clark's party then paddled ashore under cover of night to meet their French counterparts and conclude what became known as the Darlan deal. As the highest-ranking French officer in North Africa, Admiral Darlan was offered a deal by the Allies. If he switched sides and brought his forces in and joined the Allies, he would be given command of all North African French forces. In a complex deal that would probably take 15 minutes to explain, Darlan agreed to the deal and ordered the French fleet anchored at Toulon scuttled. Angered by this, Hitler had his forces occupy all of Vichy France. Now it was time for Operation Torch. The American army was about to get its first taste of battle against the Germans at 3 landing sites in North Africa. Torch was led by General Eisenhower. This map shows the 3 widely scattered landing sites across Morocco and Algeria. The French Navy's ships in North Africa refused Darlan's scuttling order and chose to fight. They were destroyed by the U.S. Navy while still in their ports. The early landings were progressing well for the Allies. Still, in some areas, the French were firing on American troops and putting up stiff resistance. After the Allies landed in North Africa, Pétain secretly ordered Admiral Darlan, then in Algeria, to merge the French forces in Africa with those of the Allies, just as Clark had proposed they do. But at the same time, Pétain published official messages protesting the landing. He was playing both sides of the coin. As expected, public opinion in the Allied nations was generally negative. Many asked how the Allies could deal with a known Nazi sympathizer and collaborationist such as Darlan. The answer was simple. The deal was a military and political necessity. The agreement undoubtedly saved many lives in Morocco and spared the city of Casablanca, which had been scheduled to be bombed from the air and shelled by warships at the order of General Patton. Admiral Darlan met his end on Christmas Eve, 1942, when he was shot dead by a young Free French supporter of de Gaulle who hated Darlan's collaboration with the Nazis. After faltering in its first few battles in North Africa, the American army finally found its footing and, along with the British, pushed the Germans and Italians into a small corner of Tunisia, where hundreds of thousands of them surrendered. At this point, I want to talk a little bit about Monaco. The Principality of Monaco was also involved in World War II, but was more of a victim than a participant. To give you a little background, in the 1860s, Monaco gave France part of its territory in exchange for France providing military protection. In 1922, Louis II became Prince of Monaco. He was the father of Prince Rainier, who married Grace Kelly. Not Louis himself, but his son. While Louis's sympathies were strongly pro-French, he tried to keep Monaco neutral during World War II, but supported the Vichy French government. But there was a conflict. The majority of Monaco's population was of Italian descent, and thus was pro-Italy and pro-Mussolini, Hitler's partner in crime. Monaco was home to about 300 Jews prior to the war, and it was hosting an unknown number of Jewish refugees. In August of 1942, the government of Monaco arrested 66 Jews in a single night and handed them over to the Vichy authorities for onward deportation to the German death camps. Only 9 of them survived. Some members of the Monaco government tried to shelter the Jews by hiding them or issuing them false papers. On November 10, 1942, Hitler ordered Operation Anton, the military occupation of the former free zone of Vichy France. Italian forces participated in this occupation, taking over an area of France around Grenoble, Nice, and Toulon, and Monaco. The Italians took over Monaco without a fight and set up a puppet administration. In September of 1943, following Mussolini's removal from power in Italy, the German army occupied Monaco and began the deportation of the rest of the Jewish population to concentration camps. Those Germans and Italians who hadn't been killed or captured in North Africa retreated to the island of Sicily, off the toe of Italy. The British and Americans followed them, and the battle, called Operation Husky, continued. After a month-long battle across Sicily in the summer of '43, the British and the Americans forced the Germans and Italians to abandon Sicily and retreat to the mainland of Italy. Again, the Americans and British followed, making their amphibious landings at Salerno and Taranto in September. The Italian campaign, which lasted from September 1943 until May of 1945, was a very difficult time for the Allied forces because the Germans had occupied the mountainous regions of Italy, and it was very difficult for the Allies to roust them out of those mountains. But after 8 months of bitter fighting, Rome finally fell on June 4th, 1944, just 2 days before Operation Overlord, the invasion at Normandy. And now, at long last, we get to Operation Dragoon. As I mentioned, the Allied invasions of Normandy and southern France were originally planned to take place simultaneously, but because much of the shipping and landing craft had been transferred from the Mediterranean to Britain to take part in Overlord, there simply wasn't enough lift, as the military calls the transportation of large numbers of troops, to mount both invasions at the same time. So D-Day for Operation Dragoon, originally codenamed Operation Anvil, some of you may have heard that term, had to be pushed back until the middle of August. Although the fighting in Italy was still hot and heavy, several units were withdrawn from Italy and earmarked for Dragoon. General Alexander Patch was put in overall command of 7th Army, which Patton had commanded during Operation Husky. Within 7th Army was 6th Corps and 3 American divisions, 3rd Infantry Division, the 36th Infantry Division, and the 45th Infantry Division, which was made up of the Colorado and Oklahoma National Guard. All 3 divisions had seen heavy fighting during the Sicilian and Italian campaigns. Added to this force were such units as the U.S. Canadian 1st Special Service Force, sometimes called the Devil's Brigade, the 517th Parachute Infantry Regiment, the 551st Parachute Infantry Regiment, the 509th Parachute Infantry Battalion, and the 1st Battalion of the British 2nd Independent Parachute Brigade, and many others, including Free French Forces, the 1st French Army under General Jean Latreille de Tassigny. That's my attempt at pronouncing that in French. Along with considerable assets of the 12th Tactical Air Command and the Mediterranean Allied Air Force, and a large naval contingent. There would also be French commandos and help from the French partisans known as the Maquis. On the evening before the invasion by the main assault forces, French commandos conducted Operation Romeo, landing west of the invasion beaches to destroy the German gun emplacements there. A force of less than 100 commandos landed, climbed a 350-foot cliff, and in less than half an hour destroyed the guns. After this success, the rest of the commandos landed, and a force of about 700 men established a blocking position across the road to Toulon, preventing a flanking attack on the assault force when it hit the beach. The Germans lost 300 killed and 700 taken prisoner during Operation Romeo. There were also 7 French divisions under General Patch's control, a situation that Charles de Gaulle found intolerable, but he was powerless to do anything about it, even though he had declared himself the head of the French government in exile. Dragoon was a massive effort. The total Dragoon invasion force would number somewhere between 175 to 200,000 men, 2,000 aircraft, and over 630 ships of all description. The amphibious fleet was under the command of American Admiral H. Kent Hewitt and consisted of 6 battleships, 4 aircraft carriers. There were no aircraft carriers during the Normandy invasion, 21 cruisers, 100 destroyers, and 500 transport ships. There was also a deception plan. A large naval formation made a feint at Genoa, Italy, that drew German sources away from the landing area. And as at Normandy, dummy parachutists were dropped behind German lines to confuse the enemy. The Germans had approximately 250 to 300,000 men scattered across the 45-mile wide invasion area. Just as the defense of Normandy had been the responsibility of Erwin Rommel, the defense of southern France was the responsibility of General Johannes von Blaskowitz of Army Group G. There were 600 concrete bunkers and pillboxes, plus hundreds of guns and thousands of mines along the coast to form an obstacle for the Allies. The likely invasion beaches were also studded with a variety of anti-ship obstacles to impede landing craft, just as at Normandy. The Allies knew it would take a maximum effort to succeed. Troops, ships, and aircraft were gathered from various parts of the Mediterranean and ordered to converge at the Côte d'Azur. The invasion plan was a carbon copy of the Normandy invasion. An early morning airborne and glider landings, followed by seaborne assaults across a wide swath of coast. In the early morning hours of August 15th, American paratroopers marched to their transport planes and their gliders and prepared for the big day, the other D-Day. The skies were full of American transport planes, filled with paratroopers landing behind German lines, just as they had done at Normandy. Accompanying them were the gliders, filled with supplies and more troops. The infantry were also loaded onto their landing vessels along with their vehicles. There's a shot of the convoy on its way to France. The target areas were blanketed by heavy naval gunfire from British and American ships and bombs dropped by hundreds of Allied aircraft. Here's a squadron of B-25s on their way to hit their targets. Here you see a bridge at Arles being destroyed by Allied aircraft, and a German bunker and vehicles that have been wrecked by the bombing and shelling. This is a rather complex map showing the coastal area that was invaded by the Allied forces, and it shows where various elements landed and the directions in which they moved after coming ashore. I've highlighted in yellow this area, which is right in the center of the invasion area. And this was the sector that was the responsibility of the 45th Infantry Division. Up here is the 180th Infantry Regiment from Oklahoma, and the Coloradans were hitting the beaches at Saint-Maxime. Here's a view of Saint-Maxime with the invasion fleet anchored offshore and troops wading into their assigned beachheads. Compared to the chaos and confusion and carnage that accompanied the Normandy landings, the invasion of southern France came off more or less like clockwork. But let there be no mistake, the Germans did put up a fierce fight, but the Allies quickly came ashore, moved inland, overcame the defenses, and began taking prisoners. Here are a few of the prisoners looking a little worse for wear, and a few more, and a bunch more. Heavy equipment also hit the beaches so that the invasion troops had the firepower and transportation necessary for the drive northward. Here you see a line of Sherman tanks heading along the coast road. Any Germans who tried to stand in the way were soon dealt with. French forces took both Toulon and Marseille, the two largest cities in southern France, on August 27th, and they were able to open the ports for future arrivals of troops and supplies. The French suffered 7,000 men killed and wounded during the liberation of those two cities. Here are some French soldiers taking a break in Marseille following their victory. The scars of war are still visible on a few buildings in Marseille. I took this picture this summer when I was there. And here are some shell marks that have been left on the main cathedral overlooking the Marseille harbor to remind people of the sacrifice of the French during World War II. As you can see, Toulon also suffered extensive damage. Another view of Toulon and the harbor. It was pretty well destroyed, but luckily the French were able to put it back into operation within a short period of time. The Allies wasted no time moving northward into the heart of the region at a pace that was well ahead of schedule. Grenoble was liberated on August 23rd. Nice was liberated on the 28th of August, and Lyon was taken on September 3rd. Dijon was liberated on September 11th. The Germans pulled out of Monaco on August 25th, and after a week of confusion, on September 3rd, an American jeep drove into Monte Carlo and announced that the country was liberated. A group of American soldiers from the 517th Parachute Regiment combat team arrived later in the day to make it official. In late 1944, French troops returned to Monaco. Except for a souvenir photo or two, there was no time for the liberators to stop and relax and enjoy the sights of the area through which they passed. It was go, 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 keeping on the heels of the retreating Germans. The drive northward to Alsace-Lorraine and the Vosges Mountains would continue until the end of 1944, when the Germans put up their stiffest defense. As you can imagine, the French were quite excited about being freed of the Germans, turning out in great numbers to greet their liberators. Here's our few photos showing the joy expressed by the civilians towards their liberators, including this one was a jeep operated by a military camera crew. There's a little girl by the side of the road and her dog greeting the Americans as they went by. A woman on a car waving to forces in a half-track. Some GIs like this Coast Guardsman even made new friends. Not a bad friend to meet. Although Operation Dragoon was a raging success, it was not bloodless. 3,000 Americans were killed and 4,500 were wounded, while the French suffered a total of around 10,000 killed and wounded. The British lost men too, but I've been unable to uncover exactly how many. There are no exact figures on German casualties, but 100,000 were taken prisoner. In less than a month, the Operation Dragoon invasion force had advanced 500 miles. As an aside, I should mention that the 45th Division, as part of the 7th Army, moved northward, fought a battle in the wintry mountains of the Vosges area that was became the southern German thrust of what we know as the Battle of the Bulge. The 45th pushed into Germany in early 45, taking Aschaffenburg and Nuremberg, liberated the Dachau concentration camp, and it was liberated by a battalion from the 157th, the Colorado National Guard, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, and there's an exhibit upstairs about that if you haven't seen that, and took Munich at the end of 1945, or April of 45. Over on the right-hand side here, you can see this is Hitler's beer garden, the Fest Hall there, where many of his rallies were conducted in the 20s and early 30s, and it became the command post for the 157th Regiment. I don't know if they got to enjoy any free beer, but it was certainly a great day when they took that over. In many ways, the triumph in the South eclipsed even Operation Overlord. But we can't forget that German strength in the South was far less than at Normandy, and a fuel shortage hampered the Allied advance. More than 3/4 of a century later, the beautiful seaside towns of the Côte d'Azur have returned to their pre-war glory. The luxury hotels are once again full, the harbors are crammed with expensive yachts, and the casino at Monte Carlo is doing a brisk business. The ugliness of war has been wiped away. It's almost as though the war had never even passed through it. Unlike at Normandy, the museums and monuments to this victorious operation in southern France are few and far between. Here you see a few of those museums and monuments. There are also German bunkers left over from the war. Over 800 Americans lie buried in the Rhone American Cemetery, resting for all eternity in the land they helped liberate. But the people of Provence remember, and they are grateful. Without a doubt, Operation Dragoon contributed greatly to Allied successes in France and in the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. Perhaps one day it will step out of the shadow cast by Operation Overlord, and its importance will be recognized as one of the greatest military operations of all time. Thank you very much. I will open it for questions, but I want to make a commercial announcement here. My book about the 45th Division, called The Rock of Anzio, contains a chapter about the invasion of southern France and the 45th driving up to the Vosges Mountains and then into Germany. So if anybody would like a copy of this, I will. I've got a couple of them here. I'll let those go for a reasonable price of only $15. So with that out of the way, if you have any questions, I will try and answer them. Who wants to go first? Dave.
Clint, just kind of aside there, when I was in Florence, what reminded me of this, you were talking about Matt Clark, and when I was in Florence, my wife and I hired a guide, and he says, the first thing he says, "You know who our biggest hero is here?" And I said, "No." He said, "General Matt Clark."
Mark Clark.
Mark Clark, I'm sorry. And I said, of course, my curiosity, I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Because he refused to bomb Florence." I thought that was interesting. And when we were there, there was a lot of, there was still a lot of attention to World War II by the Americans. So
When were you there?
2011.
Okay. It's interesting because not too many people have good things to say about Mark Clark. He was vilified by both the Italians and the Americans. A lot of it had to do with his conduct of the invasion of Italy, Operation Avalanche, and then the push northward. But he did spare some of the historic cities of Italy, like Florence, and for that, I think the locals are grateful. But if you go to Monte Cassino and you go to the Abbey there, they blame him for the destruction of the Abbey, when in fact he had nothing to do with it, even though he was the 5th Army commander. And I won't go into all the details, but he's gotten a bad rap by the 36th Division because Clark had sent them in an attack across the Rapido River trying to break through the Gustav line, and they were torn to pieces. And I think it was after the war that the state legislature of Texas, because the 36 was the Texas National Guard, they wanted to indict or sue Mark Clark for having wasted so many lives of members of the Texas Division at Rapido River. That suit never went anywhere, but just shows you the range of emotions that Mark Clark stirs up. Some people said he was a great war hero. You know, he got to command UN forces in Korea after MacArthur was dismissed by Truman. But there are other people who, you know, have nothing good to say about him. But it's interesting to hear that aspect. Any other questions, comments, observations? Yes, sir.
The picture, they are two-engine bombers.
Mm-hmm.
I believe they were B-36, B-26s.
Really? Okay. Well, it says Air Force on your hat, so maybe you know. I thought they were 25s. I know they used 25s and 26s and 17s and 24s in the campaign, but maybe I got the identification wrong enough. Thank you for that. I will look into it. Any other questions, comments, corrections? All right. Well, I thank you very much for being here today. I hope you learned a little bit more about Operation Dragoon and its importance to the overall operation. I do want to apologize for having to read much of my script. I had surgery back in January, and the anesthesia has left me with a little bit of a problem memorizing things. So I have to rely sometimes on the written word. But again, thank you so much for coming. Please take time to look around the museum. It's been a while since you've been here, we've got a whole bunch of new exhibits up there that I think you'll find of interest. So again, thank you very much.
Just one quick comment, and again, I tried to find together on the 6th and the Loveland get-together on the 10th. I will try again in the next few minutes to find something, but
I've got it on my computer.
okay, so we'll still try to do that real quick for those of you that do want that information. So Jim will try that. As a matter of fact, on the computer right here, I'll try to go to our website and see if I can find that. And if I'm successful, then I'll bring it up on the screen here in just a minute. So just wanted to let you know that.